Hey folks, thanks for joining me today for this video vlog in which I am interviewing someone I have a great deal of respect and admiration for. This is David Loftus. He is a Portland-based writer, singer, performer, actor, and I invited him today after reading some of his very interesting Facebook posts recently to help talk with me about the authentic voice. So that's what we're talking about today, the authentic voice, how to express it in public, and a lot of other interesting stuff. So David, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here, Laura.
We're going to have some fun. So let's start with a really broad question. What does the authentic voice mean to you? And as a sub-question, how do you find yourself expressing your authentic voice in the world?
Authentic voice just means presenting whatever you have inside yourself that is most true and most honest and most reflective of who you are and giving it out, whether it's to the world or just to one other person face to face, and whether it's in the form of speech or writing or song or formal storytelling or formal writing of a play or something, but whatever it is that is truly reflects yourself and your values and what you see in front of you and what you want to see in the world.
I love that. As a transformational voice teacher, of course, a huge bulk of what I do is helping people learn how their bodies create sound so they can release bad vocal habits they've been carrying for years, release tension in the body so that whatever's inside will come out in the most effortless physical manner possible. That's a big part of it. But what I didn't really truly understand when I was going through training until I started teaching is there's a big connection between what I call the inner voice and the outer voice. And you can be speaking and have great vocal technique, but if there's a disconnect between your head and your heart, you don't have that same impact on the audience. Mm-hmm. Isn't that what you've experienced as an actor and a writer and musician?
Yeah, let me say that I've spent pretty much all my adult life trying to be a writer, and I only came to acting. I did acting every once in a while for a lark, but I only became fairly serious about stage and then later film and video and commercial print work comparatively late in my life. I was in my mid-40s when all that really began to happen. I was trying to be a writer, but just parenthetically, what you said about singing is the same case with acting classes. I think a fair amount of acting classes is getting rid of your bad habits. The things that you tend to do naturally, physical and verbal tics, which you're comfortable with and you use out in the world when you're being yourself, that don't necessarily serve the character you've been assigned to do in a particular project or the story that you have to tell. And the teacher and your fellow students in the class will say, see, you're doing this and it works against you in telling this narrative. But writing is what I have to do. A lot of people here in Portland think of me as an actor, and I enjoy it, but it's not what I have to do. Writing is what I have to do, and I would do it whether I was paid for it or not, or whether anybody read it or not. Of course, I'd rather to be read and paid.
Of course.
But that's always the rub.
Well, it's interesting to me, though, even though you're primarily a writer, what you said about acting and getting rid of the stuff that doesn't serve you. For some reason, this reminds me of this book that I just told you about. I've been reading this year. It's called The Daily Stoic. And this is one of those daily meditation books that I just love. And it was sent to me by a guy named Michael Vickers, who interviewed me for his podcast. We talked about the authentic voice. And I am just loving this book. As a performer, as a singer, as an actor, any of those, we can be emotional people because you have to feel emotion when you're up in front of an audience or the audience isn't going to buy it. There's a disconnect between your head and heart. You're not feeling something. But this book is really about philosophy. And so I've been learning a lot about this, about, okay, I'm an emotional person. I feel things. That's a good thing. But what if my emotion in that particular moment needs to be examined? Maybe I need to look at my beliefs, the way I just automatically think about things and approach the world, and not let those emotions take control over expressing how I really want to be in the world. I hope this is making sense. Add on to this for me and tell me your thoughts on what I'm trying to convey here.
Yeah, and I've never quite thought about it this way before, but one of the ways I've earned my daily bread since straight out of college is editing and proofreading. That is, fixing other people's writing for print and publication and so on. And actually, a first draft is like your emotions, and editing is like bringing in your mind to sharpen and focus and remove the bad habits. Everybody has bad writing habits. They have words they like to use that aren't necessarily the most effective for the given thing they have to communicate. And I've actually written several articles for entrepreneur.com about, bad writing for commercial communication habits, because I edit a lot of copy for people's websites and I see the same things over and over. Everybody writes like everybody else. Everybody has the same bad habits because writers are copying other people's stuff. They're reading other people's stuff and reproducing it much the same way out of themselves. And again, those are habits. It's an easy kind of emotional way of surfing along that then you have to bring your critical faculties to hone. And that's one of the things I do professionally.
That absolutely resonates with me. And I haven't really thought about it until just now either. But even when I was writing my, my ebook, How a Bella Found Her Voice, it was such an emotional process, just everything flooding in. But that certainly wasn't where I could stop. I had to go back and, bring in that critical, the rational thinking piece. But so let's talk about how this relates to how we first started having this conversation, was because you put a lot of content out there on social media and in Facebook in particular, because of course we're friends there outside Facebook too, of course. But how does that kind of relate to what's going on with you on Facebook? Tell me about that.
Well, I grew up as a reader of newspapers, and I really liked certain newspaper columnists, syndicated columnists like Sidney J. Harris, who was based in Chicago and wrote a column a day for 35 years. Charles McCabe was a local columnist in the San Francisco area, and I used to read his column in the San Francisco Chronicle and Examiner. Now, these were guys who had been longtime journalists. They'd worked their way up, but they didn't write about breaking news of the week or politics or economics. Those might filter in tangentially now and then, but they wrote more what you're talking about, philosophy. They wrote about human relationships and values and spiritual things. And, there are some things that Sidney Harris wrote that I'll never forget. He was talking about relationship, and he said, rather than trying to find Mr. Right or Ms. Right, your job is to be Mr. or Ms. Right. Because if you're being your authentic self, people who appreciate that kind of person will naturally gravitate toward you. So I should have been a guy like that. I had a job as a cub reporter in my late 20s, police news, school boards, reporting for 3 years. And I also wrote op-ed columns as kind of calisthenics, trying out what works, what doesn't. I wrote satires, I wrote personal stuff, I wrote hard political commentary. And then that was right about the time newspapers were kind of dying. It was just a couple of years before the internet came along, and it all overturned. And I never had another full-time job as a newspaper reporter. I wrote occasional freelance features and so on. And I was always doing other stuff, but let's cut to the chase. How I got to what I'm doing now. Social media gave me an opportunity to reach out to lots and lots of people, some friends, some strangers. It's a very ready and available, but extremely fickle audience. You've got to be skilled to get them and hold them And again, you don't necessarily have any complete control over it, because the bots and the mechanisms won't help you if people don't notice you right off and start making comments and clicks. But I encountered a lot of people whose points of view were very different from mine. And I'd engage with them, particularly if I thought they were really not being very reasonable or rational, or especially if I felt they were bullying other people. I would tend to swoop in and try to interfere or referee. Now, that's just not going to go very far if you're abusive or you're not respectful of people.
Mhm.
So I impose my own rules on myself. No name calling, no obscenity, no making fun of people's names, no looking up their personal information on their page and then using it against them.
Mhm.
People do that to me all the time. And I just let it go. Or sometimes they point it out, you're doing this. And it gives me a chance to think farther than I would if I were just hanging out with people who agree with me. If everybody agrees and they say, yeah, that's cool, right on, man, you don't question your own position much. You're
Right.
just comfortable. It's a comfort zone. And you don't learn from being comfortable. You don't grow from being comfortable. You need not to run away from discomfort. And to a certain extent, you may want to invite some if you're going to learn and grow. And it's hard to do that with people who have a very different point of view and who are being abusive and who think you're crazy. You've got to be very skilled. And over the decades, since the mid-90s and the days of Usenet discussion groups, I've acquired considerable skills and tricks to keep the conversation going, or to gently shut someone down who is really not being useful. And I do that by pointing out their tactics and their abuse and so on and so forth. Because they're not really listening to me, it's for the benefit of anybody else who might be watching.
Which
I try to continue to put in intellectual content, and I also do meta discussion of tactics, because it provides aid and comfort and food for thought for other people, not just allies, but lurkers who may be confused and not sure what to think. So I'm trying to present something useful for them, not just shut down someone who disagrees with me.
So I think you just answered what was going to be my next question, but just assure me that you have, because I think you have. A big point of the Daily Stoic is, and I've been, thinking this way myself for years, is one of the biggest ways to make yourself crazy is to focus on things that you have absolutely no control over. And I mean, that's a cause of arguments in couples. It's a problem in the workplace. You've got to learn how to focus on only that which you can control, which is usually not other people at all, but what goes on between your two ears. So just expand on what you were saying, because I think that's a big part. Nice. Liking the costume. So
My
yeah.
my mobile was ringing, so I didn't quite catch your question. If you can hit me with that last question.
I was just saying the balance. I was asking you to elaborate more, because I think you did just answer this question on the balance between avoiding that which you cannot control, which involves other people, but really focusing on what you can control, which is what goes on inside your own ears and how you express yourself. And I think what you were saying about, it's not necessarily that you're trying to shut people down. You're hoping to provide some insights for the lurkers, for the people who may not. So just expound on that a little bit more before we close.
Yeah, it's easy to let your emotions get caught up in what I, for want of a better word, call a firefight online, and to want to outperform and outwit and outtalk the other person. And because I can type more than 80 words a minute, I can generate a heck of a lot of content in a very short time. And a lot of people are not used to that, and they'll think I'm trying to shout them down. But what I'm really doing is thinking out loud. It's for me. I'm clarifying my own thoughts. I'm honing my position. I'm finding out where my blind spots are, where I need to do more homework and more research. And then, as you said, also providing aid, comfort, and information tools for folks who are confused. And so I try to do that, as well as pointing out perhaps the lack of gentility that's I'm being hit with, without acting like I'm a victim. You were asking about balance.
Yeah.
And self-care is always important. If you feel yourself getting too worked up on it, just walk away.
Yeah.
If you're invested in winning, you're going to hurt yourself.
Yes.
But if you're just invested in learning something from it and helping other people, if you're starting to get too upset, just leave. And a lot of people try to hit in the last word by saying, I've got better things to do. I have work to do. I can't believe you're taking this so seriously. And that's yet another attempt to try to win while you're leaving. And I don't do any of that. If I'm going to walk away, I just disappear, because that keeps them wondering, gee, are they still preparing another Sally, or did they have to go to work or something? Keeps them off balance, but it's self-care, because there have been times when I got too emotionally wrapped up in an argument with somebody online, and I couldn't sleep. You know, I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning with my head buzzing, because I'd let my emotions get wrapped up in what was happening. And so I make sure now I try not to look at that stuff before I go to bed. I try to do things that please and are pleasant to me in the evening, when I'm getting close to bedtime, so that doesn't get stuck in my head and disturb my rest.
Well, and I think it's just a fact of life that social media is here to stay, and there's always going to be all of that going on. The bullying is very sad, I think, especially when it comes to young people. But it is part of life, and for you, it probably is how you obtain readers. So with that, why don't you go ahead and just tell people, I'll get all your contact information from you later, so we can provide your website links and all that stuff. But just a little more about how people can find you and help support your, what's it called again, the Pantheon site? Just in closing, a little bit more information.
When I was writing furiously in the summer of 2020 about the demonstrations downtown and what the federal troops and the police were doing, a stranger in Kentucky, I was picking up hundreds of followers and new Facebook friends, people who want to know what the hell is happening in Portland. And one of them was a stranger in Kentucky, a liberal gal, who said, you really ought to start a Patreon page so people can support what you're doing. And I said, I barely heard of it. Patreon is a website for creatives to present their work, and people can support them either with a one-time payment or with a small ongoing monthly payment to send them money for what they do. And there are poets and musicians and writers and painters and photographers who put their stuff, so they'll have patrons. The title comes from patron. And so at the very end of July 2020, I launched a Patreon page, and I imported stuff I was writing on Facebook onto there and refined and expanded it. And then as time went on and things quieted in Portland, I put some of my archival film reviews and book reviews and personal essays. The book I'd been working on about my grandmother's youth in Alaska Territory a century ago, I started feeding onto that on there in episodes. I just can't follow the rules. Internet wisdom says you got to have a brand, you got to have a niche, and you stick to it. And I can't do that. I have too many interests, I have too many things I want to do, and my brand is me. That's all I can tell you. So I have my Patreon page, which has more longer, more sophisticated and refined content. You're free to friend me on Facebook. I take on anybody who's a real person. I'll accept any, because I do a lot of storytelling, entertaining, and thinking out loud on Facebook, and I put a lot of photos up there, and people enjoy what I put there. I had a video, a 73-second video that went viral last December. It got 3 million views in a week, and it finally settled in at 12.8 million views in March. And I'll give you the link to that. I won't say anything more about it, except it's very eye-opening, and it gave a lot of young folks a lot of pleasure. People just, it really thrilled the house. So I started a TikTok page. And on my TikTok page, I put in short videos of me reading Edgar Allan Poe, of my dog's antics, of, video stuff. Then the company who had put up that video put it on their Instagram page in mid-February. I didn't have an Instagram page. I didn't have any interest doing that, but I figured, well, let's see what we can get out of this. So a month ago, I launched my first Instagram account. And again, I didn't do what you're supposed to do, which is try to funnel all the traffic toward what you do and who you are and try to monetize it. I just decided I'm going to put pretty pictures on my Instagram page. I'm going to put beauty and occasionally startling images from my own personal photo archive on Instagram. And if people like that, they can follow me. We'll just see what happens there.
Well, there you go.
It's about play. You have to enjoy what you're doing. It's not just about finding the angst and the true needs and desires. You've got to learn to enjoy the process too.
So that's how you can have fun with David Loftus, everybody who's listening to this. Thanks a lot for joining us. And also, if you want to find out about the online karaoke that David and I participate in from time to time hosted by his brother Toby, let me know. I'll get you information on that. You can also see David on a co-host salmon commercial on Channel 6, Coin 6 News here in the Portland area. Check that out. Check out his Pantheon page. And thank you again for joining us today, David. Thanks to y'all for listening and watching.
Thanks.